Agenda today, I want to talk about the priorities. So there may last time. So priority is permissionless hubs. And so this is what like 90% of the team's time and energy is going into. And then there's some feature work on the horizon that we're starting to plan, but we haven't actively started work on and that we're looking for feedback on. I've also linked the full roadmap here, so you can click on this and load like all the stuff that's actually being worked on. If you're interested in picking up tasks or want to contribute, or just want to see the status of where things are, this roadmap is public and should give you a pretty good sense of how things are working. If you're having trouble accessing this or you don't have the right permissions, let me know, but I think this should be publicly available. Cool. The second thing is I sent out a dev survey last week and a bunch of you responded. So thank you all for the feedback. I'll post a longer cast thread with all of the actual results that we got. But the two important things to pull out as a summary here is one, documentation is a big pain point. I think right now we did a quick first pass where it's in GitHub and it's kind of buried in, the subfolder of the Hubble mono repo. One of the things we're working on now is kind of rethinking how the whole documentation works, starting with a new farcaster.xyz homepage that makes it easier to find stuff and find applications, but also working on having more specific documentation for Hubble. Like if you're running, we've had we've had a pretty big spike over the last weekend where a lot of folks signed up largely due to the Twitter rate limit drama, but it's actually both brought on a bunch of old users and reactivated a bunch of existing users. I expect this to kind of return to the normal until we get to open and permissionless signups. But for now, I think there's an influx of new users, and this will lead to like more activity in the short term. Cool. Any questions on any of that before we jump into the actual specs? Great. So for permissionless hubs, the last missing piece is permissionless peering. Right now, it's kind of an annoying process where you have to like get this PR, get it merged in, get it deployed, and then you can connect your hub. We want to get rid of that and make it so that if you just download the hub package, you can get it up and running and you'll immediately be able to peer. But we do need to make a few changes to the way the hub sync and architecture works and fix some bugs that we have. So Sanjay, who's on the call, is working on a design for this. We don't have an ETA yet because we haven't finished the design, but once that's done, we'll share it with the group, and we hope that's coming pretty soon. On permissionless signups, there's 4 big pieces that we're working on. The first one is the L2 decision. It's still pending. We're still in final talks with some of the L2s on where we're going to deploy the actual contracts, but likely by next call, we'll make a final decision here. The ENS usernames FIP is one of the big ones that's shipping very soon. If you don't know what this is about, I'd recommend watching this like quick video overview before you read the spec, which can be quite detailed. The high-level takeaway for folks on this call is, with the next release of the hubs, we're going to move to a state of the world where, by default, every user when they sign up gets an F name that's no longer generated on-chain, but is actually generated by an off-chain server and is compliant with ENS. So every Farcaster user now has an ENS compliant name that continues to work on the protocol as it does today. So if you're at Brian on the protocol, you'll continue to use @Brian in the apps today, and your official like ENS name that's valid on the L1 will be, @brian.farcaster.xyz, which can be verified on chain. So that's the default experience. Everyone gets this free username, and it works. The second piece is you'll also be able to use your L1 ENS name as a username if you'd like. So once you've signed up, once you've acquired your free Farcaster username, if you connect an address that has an ENS name associated with it, and you set this as your preferred ENS name, you have to set a couple of messages on the hub to make this work. Then you'll actually start using, Brian.eth as your name instead of Brian.farcaster.xyz. So you can actually upgrade to an on-chain decentralized name, and that'll work within the Farcaster clients as just tagging @Brian.eth. And the hubs will have APIs to make fetching this stuff easy. So for any given user, you'll be able to ask a hub, hey, what's the set of usernames that this user has verified that they have ownership over? And you can also ask it, what's the preferred username for this user? So you'll be able to say, like, out of these 5 usernames, which one does this person want to use on applications? And anytime any of that changes, you'll get a notification to your application through the regular events pipeline in the hubs. And so you'll be able to update the state of that on your app. Cool. Any
Yeah.
questions about ENS usernames? Any concerns?
Are you guys leaning towards optimism?
We'll probably share a little more once we've like made a decision on which one we're in. Right now, we're kind of honestly talking to all of them, and we're still making a final call on that.
Okay. Yeah, dude, there's like no clear solid L2. I just like didn't make a decision. I was like, fuck it, I'll just stay on mainnet. But I'm excited to see what you guys pick.
Yeah, I think someone asked in the group what the criteria for choosing are. I talked about this a couple dev calls ago, but the main focus for us is we want something that will let us launch quickly. So something that is stable and works today versus taking a bet on something that's going to be, highly performant 2 years from now. We want something that has low gas costs for users, that's reasonably EVM compatible so that we can actually move all of our existing stuff over. And from a decentralization perspective, I think we want to choose something that has a credible path towards decentralization. I think the reality is almost all L2s have some level of centralization in many of their components today. And this is more of a bet on the future that these things will scale and that they will offer reasonable exit to L1 and fraud proofs or whatever validation mechanisms that they have. Cool. Switching back to ENS usernames really quickly. Did anyone have any other questions on ENS names? Nope. All right, we'll keep rolling then. Greg is excited. Okay, flexible storage. So we talked about this in the last call as well. And again, if you want a video overview, you can click into this and see how this works. But the very high level is what we wanted to get to with flexible storage was get to a world where people can actually choose how much storage they'd like by paying more for additional storage. So right now you have somewhat arbitrary limits on how much data you can store on a hub to stop people from DDoSing the network. So this means there's 10,000 casts, and if you cast 10,001 times, your first cast gets revoked. And so now for users who actually want to store 100,000 or even 1,000,000 casts, there's a way to actually go and make a payment to the network on whatever L2 chain we end up using that will actually tell the hubs to store more data for you for the period of a year and lets you buy additional units of storage. We still have to figure out exactly how many messages each unit of storage will have. Aditya is actually working on some storage benchmarking and analysis, which will make that easier. But apart from the specific details of how much each unit of storage will have, the rough mechanisms for this are all kind of specified here. We'll launch it silently on the Gurley testnet, so it'll work, but obviously Gurley is free, so you'll be able to get storage for free, and we'll subscribe everyone to storage for free. And then when we launch on mainnet, what we're going to do is all existing users get a unit of storage for a year for free. So you're kind of just like register it up for users. And then new users signing up will have to actually pay for storage or have the application pay for it on their behalf when the sign up is happening. And you can do this in a single transaction when you sign up. So you can make a single call to the contract to get your FID. And you can also grab a storage unit from the storage contract in the same transaction. Cool. This should have no impact for devs. I think for the most part, you won't notice anything different over the APIs or any of the things that you use to talk to hubs. The only thing to be aware of is if you have any dependencies in your app where you hard-coded that a user can only have 10,000 casts because that's the limit on the hub, that's now going to change. Each user can have larger or higher or lower limits based on how many units of storage that they decided to pay for. Cool. I'll pause to see if there's any questions or people have any thoughts on this before rolling on to the mainnet release.
Hey, everyone. This is Aiden speaking. I made a comment on the discussion about an hour ago. It's not really related directly to the current concern for flexible storage, but was just an extra idea that I'd be curious to get feedback if it makes sense. Essentially, it's most likely the case that there'll be a bunch of unused storage and that it's not going to get fully filled up. And so there was a question around, could it be valuable to make that unused storage available to users under like a second tier of storage, like a free tier, hypothetically, where whenever there's spare space, there's maybe an opportunity to kind of have users sign up with a lower tier and be able to join Farcaster much more cheaply, potentially for free on that free tier. Obviously, there would need to be some decision on like which users get the free tier or not and what happens if it gets filled up. I don't think it would really make sense for that to be part of the protocol, but if desired, then maybe there could be like a second order out of protocol way to get social consensus on that. And the benefits of that is it would allow for kind of free signups. Yeah, that's the main benefit. My one thought was there could be a risk that like creates a free rider problem and everyone wants then the free storage instead of the paid storage. But I think as long as all hubs like had a strong social consensus that in the protocol the highest tier is always paid, then hubs could start to like drop free storage or disallow it if there was ever a growing free rider problem.
Yeah, I like the general push, which is how do we make sure that storage is not overpriced, that we're not actually pushing out users that would be valuable to the network just because the storage prices are too high. So here's how we're thinking about it. I think in the long run, storage should actually be market-based. So if there's a bunch of unused storage and no one's claiming it, the price of claiming a new unit of storage should actually come down over time. And there's a bunch of Solidity auction contract mechanisms that you can write that would be fancier, that would just decay the price of storage. So, let's say it's $10 today and the hubs are full, and then either hub storage expands or people use Farcaster less, the price should come down to make it easier for new people to come on board. For this initial version of the contracts for year one, because remember, the storage contracts are relaunched every year, so they can have new logic. So for year one, we opted to keep it super simple and just have a fixed price. And the working here is if we see people aren't signing up, we can go in and reduce the price. If we see that too many people are signing up and hubs are running out of space, we can go increase the price until we can figure out a way to increase the amount of storage space on the hubs. So it's kind of a crude admin operated tool that gives us the ability to open up more storage if it's not being used, or reduce storage if it's being used too much. I like the idea of a second tier of storage. I think the two problems that we would have to solve for, which make this a much bigger feature, are one, if storage is free, you will have spammers. And so by default, if you just offer some amount of free storage, it's just going to be maximally used at every point in time. And maybe that's okay. But that's just one of the side effects, is that content will be lower quality. And by default, most people would choose to ignore it and it'll kind of overflow. The second thing is, if hubs can optionally choose to have or not have some of that data, I think you're going to have to rewrite the P2P layer quite a bit, because our P2P layer right now is very opinionated on we sync everything everywhere all at once. And I think that would have to be changed. So not opposed to it, but I think it's a much more significant rewrite, and we'll probably look at it after mainnet.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I think that'll make sense. I actually did make another post earlier today about that last point you made around the P2P layer being opinionated, about whether or not everyone should sync everything. But yeah, that's off the topic for this call.
Cool. I'll take a look at those. I noticed some comments come in right before this call, but I haven't had a chance to look at them yet. So thanks for writing those up. Sweet. Last topic on here is mainnet release. So the path to getting to mainnet is, one, we want to audit our contracts next. So we'll go through an audit phase where we finalize these contracts, get it through a couple of auditors, get to a place where we feel really confident that they're working really well, and then do a test migration where we migrate everything over to an L2 testnet, move all the user data, everything over, have it run fully, and then repeat that migration to the L2 mainnet so that we know 100% that things are working okay. So we expect that the final L2 migration will happen optimistically in October. So there's a protocol upgrade on 10.4, so we can time it around that, or on the November upgrade, which is 11.15. We'll have more specifics about this and what'll happen as we get closer to the date, and more guides for like how to upgrade if you're a developer. For the most part, I think you're going to be able to just, if you're using hubs, just rely on the data that's coming out of hubs, and it should all kind of work seamlessly. But if you're running a hub, or if you're reading directly from the smart contracts themselves to make any decisions or to use any of that data, that will have to change, as the hubs will have to point to a new contracts, and the contracts themselves will change to a new location. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward, since I think most devs are either reading from Warpcast APIs or the hubs, but we'll have a guide for how to migrate all of that stuff as we get closer to the date. Cool. Last two features that are in development. So one is instant recovery. Instant recovery, we talked about this last week, and it's just the general idea that previously the recovery was a two-phase system. where you would actually have a phase one where users would, your recovery address could request the recovery, and a phase two after a time delay where you could complete the recovery. And so this kind of prevents the case where the recovery address can just yank the address away without the original owner giving permission a second time. But it added a lot of complexity to the recovery flows, and it made the like, I lost my key phrase, I would like to log back in, a very complicated process for a lot of users. And so we introduced a new simple recovery system that says, hey, you can delegate your recovery to a single address. That can be your primary ENS wallet, or it can be a trusted application that you use like Warpcast, Discover, Jam, and you can have them manage it for you. If you want more sophisticated recovery systems, like an M of N wallet, or having a multi-party social recovery where you have 2 of 3 friends do this, then you can do this pretty easily by setting up a smart contract and having the smart contract be the recovery address and baking in whatever logic you like into that contract. So we wanted to keep the contract level recovery system super simple and push the rest of the stuff into a composable way that you can build it with your own smart contract. So this is actually, it's in draft, but we are going to move it to in review this week and have it actually shipped by next week. The one downside of this is this has introduced some potential for griefing, which we've added in the Farcaster, which I think Horsefax, who may be on this call, added into the Farcaster contracts repo. We have like an issue outlining it here. If anyone's particularly interested in sort of smart contract attack vectors, I'll post this link here. But we're kind of thinking through some of the implications of this change and how it affects sequencing of transactions. And we'll probably have a solution for this soon.
And Varun, I replied to this message that you asked, but on OP stack chains, including Base and Optimism, the mempool is private. And so you don't have the griefing vector that you were thinking about, where you could read the mempool and then submit a quick transaction that would kind of like front run any recovery attempt.
Oh, cool. That's super helpful. That might make some of these problems not problems. Thanks, Jesse. Sweet. Last one is direct casts. Cassie gave a quick overview of that last week. Again, this is pretty early in draft stage, and we're thinking about how we take the direct cast system that works on Warpcast today and actually make it protocol level so we can have other clients implement it. I think this is a non-trivial piece of work and it's unlikely to ship this year, but we're going to continue to keep refining the design and get to a place where the protocol feels really robust before we actually encourage clients to start adopting or using it. But if you are interested in the cryptography of how this works and want to contribute to the design, we could definitely use more eyes on the protocol and thinking through some of the implications of how all of this works. Cool. That kind of brings us to the end of this session. There's a few shout outs and some asks, which we'll get to in a second. But before I do that, any other topics that people wanted to discuss in an open forum that we haven't got to today? We have one question in the chat about what L2s. We're talking to honestly a broad swath of L2s. So obviously Jesse here from Base about the Base chain, Optimism mainnet about the OP chain, Polygon team about their new ZK Validium, Starknet about their chain, and even the Arbitrum team. So we're trying to cast a wide net and make sure we kind of look at all the different options out there before we make a decision. The other thing to call out, I said this on the call yesterday, and I think this is important. At least for Farcaster, the L2 decision is not a permanent decision. It's not something that once we decide we're stuck with this for the rest of the life of Farcaster. A migration to another L2 would be expensive, but it is possible. And so we want to make sure we're picking the right home to grow Farcaster for the next, call it 1 to 3 years, and that we have reasonable confidence that we'll be able to grow along with that L2. And then based on where the state of like app chains and other things are, we can always reevaluate that and consider what the right option for us is then. Cool. All right. Last call for any other questions from people. That's
Just on the direct casts, who's kind of heading that as Cassie on Mars? I saw on the GitHub. Is that because I have a CTO who specializes in cryptography? Should he just sort of liaise with them on GitHub?
Yeah, you could it's Cass on Mars or at Cassie on Farcaster. I
Okay.
don't think she's on the call today, or at least I don't see her in Zoom. So the best way to engage would probably be to either respond to that GitHub thing or on Warpcast or Farcaster, just tag at Cassie, and we can go from there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Last, a couple of asks. So thanks to folks who've been reporting issues and merging patches. I know DF did this last week. Greg merged in some improvements to the example repo this week. So thank you all for the reports and the patches and the upgrading of hubs. It's been super helpful in getting all this stuff ready for mainnet launch. The one piece of help that we could use from hub runners is if you're running a hub, just check on it, see if it's going well, see if there's any logs in your error logs. And if there are, just please send them to us. We can monitor a decent amount of state just by looking at metrics that you're publishing, but there's sometimes local errors that we don't have visibility into. So seeing some of those would be very helpful. The other thing, if you're looking to contribute, is we have a lot of open issues that need help. So if you're interested in contributing either to the hubs or to the smart contracts, there's a lot of stuff that could be worked on. You can respond directly to the tickets, or you can DM me on Farcaster, and I'm happy to get you set up with something that you can work on. Sweet. That's all we have for the dev call today, folks. Thank you all for coming. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks for this call again. Talk to you all soon.